I didn't have that same passion anymore for football. So I knew that had shifted, and then it's, okay, well, how do I turn this into a plan? How do I do this in a way that, can still pay the mortgage and care for my family and keep myself in that type of situation? So there was some planning that went into it. But, for me, I really basically dove into it.
Welcome to The In Factor, conversations about how great entrepreneurs started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and today's guest is Caleb Quaid. Caleb is the founder of Regenerative Shift, a firm that focuses on assisting businesses and communities with the transition to practices that can improve the environment. He recently worked with Raymond James Stadium in Tampa to plant the first regenerative planting project in North American professional sports with an 1,100-foot living fence of bamboo and native plants. Prior to forming Regenerative Shift in 2021, Caleb spent 12 years working with the NFL, mostly with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a senior operations and project management role. Caleb's passion for his work blends into his personal and social life. He and his two sons, Caleb and Atlas, operate a small front yard permaculture community garden from their home in Tampa, where neighbors can pick their own produce to enjoy. I am very excited to learn more about Caleb and his company in today's conversation. Caleb, thank you for joining me today on The In Factor.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you. It's really fun because I met you the first time at my grandson's birthday party, and I learned about your business. And I knew as soon as I heard about your business that I really wanted to see if we could get it on the air and share it with more people and kind of share your story. So you've started a company called Regenerative Shift, and it's an environmental consulting firm, and it focuses on assisting businesses and communities with transitioning to regenerative practices. So tell us a little bit about what that means. What do you do every day?
Sure. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So Regenerative Shift, it's environmental consulting, working primarily with businesses of all sizes, and then as we get larger, working with municipalities on the idea of environmental regeneration, which is a term that most people aren't that familiar with in mainstream. On one hand, you have Walmart and PepsiCo and General Mills investing literally billions in regenerative agriculture and doing stuff on that side of the house, realizing that this is good business. But then on the other hand, you have the rest of the country that is pretty much never heard about it unless you're in a small sect of environmental nerds like that I'm in. But environmental regeneration, it goes beyond this, but kind of the entry point is with soil. And so healthy soil is vital to, healthy soil and water. It's not even an overstatement to say that would cure all of our environmental ills if you have healthy soil and healthy water worldwide. But if you are managing soil with, Roundup or chemicals or pesticides and things like that, you might have in a handful of soil, you might have absolutely no life whatsoever. Whereas in healthy soil, whether it's managed regeneratively or just left alone, will have more microbes in it than there are people on the planet. And that, if you're producing food, it makes much healthier food. It's wonderful for cleaning water and filtering our natural water cycles, which in this area is really critical and has the added benefit of, if you're managing soil for health, you're not putting the chemical fertilizers and things like that are a big cause of the red tide. So in this area, it's a really important thing to look at how we're managing our soil and our water from that perspective. It is the building block of biodiversity. The little tiny microbes get eaten by bigger things all the way up to eventually grizzly bears walking around. It's the building block of our ecosystems. And the one that really blew my mind and was a big impetus for when I decided to go into this as a career was healthy soil sequesters tons and tons of carbon. To put it in perspective, there is 3 times the amount of carbon in the top 18 inches of topsoil worldwide than there is in the atmosphere. And if we were to increase the amount of carbon in the soil by 6% globally, it would offset our global carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution, make us basically carbon neutral as a planet. And that's easier said than done. There's a lot of things that go into it, but there have been some major projects in Ethiopia and Rwanda that have shown you can do it in a desert. We've done it on thousands of properties all over the world. The biggest one is in China at a place called the Loess Plateau. It's spelled, for anybody who wants to listen, Loess. And China invested a bunch of money in over 12 years in the 90s and early 2000s, regenerated 35,000 square kilometers of soil, which is equivalent to the size of Belgium, and showed that we can do it at a countrywide scale and that this stuff works. And this is getting carbon out of the atmosphere. It's at least as importantly building the ecosystem and protecting the pollinating insects and the habitats that are so vital to what we're doing. And what I noticed is this is well known and has been established for 50, 60 years, and in some arguments thousands of years if you go back the way things were done with indigenous tribes in agriculture, but it is pretty much completely missing from corporate sustainability plans. And part of my passion is taking this to businesses and realizing that, some businesses have a sustainability plan, and there's a lot that I can do and that other sustainability consultants can help with, water efficiency and energy efficiency and that type of stuff, renewable energy. But also, let's look at your land and what are you doing with your land, and how do we create life through the land that you're managing, in case of these airports and stadiums and city of Tampa and some of these larger entities really controlling thousands of acres. And how are you managing that land in a way that is creating life and putting carbon back into the soil where it's more useful?
Wow. And that's why I got so fascinated listening to that. It's just amazing. These are real problems that we're grappling with every day, and people are coming up with lots of different solutions, many of them which possibly won't work or will be very challenging for us as a society to implement, giving up some of the things that we've become used to. If we could just rethink the way that we use our soil, we could really solve some of the problems. And that's what fascinated me when we were at my grandson's, and your son was there at the party. And so you have two young boys, and I'm sure part of your passion for this is knowing that you want to leave the planet better for them. But also just solving all these problems and finding this opportunity to work with corporate. It's really fascinating. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this point. Is this something you've always been interested in? Did your previous work kind of lead you here, your education? What got you to this point?
Sure. So my parents were, always recycled and gardened and stuff. So I had it built in a little bit as a child. But really my passion for a long time was football. And I, made this choice when I was going to grad school that the only job I wanted was in the NFL. So I was going to kick and claw and make my way into there, and ended up first starting with the Florida Gators and then the Miami Dolphins, and then ultimately with the Buccaneers, where most of my professional experience and growth has been. And it wasn't really environmentally focused. I cared, but it wasn't really my main focus for much of my time there. I had a friend who visited me in like 2018 or so, and at the time, I was recycling anything that came in, but that was recyclable. But if something, I wasn't really making consumer choices even based on making sure I'm getting something that's recyclable. And I used styrofoam coffee mugs every day. And I had in my garage, I had a trash can that I was the only person who used it. And I used it to empty out the styrofoam coffee mug that I had at that day of work. And this friend of mine came to visit, and he went to throw something in this trash can and just took the lid off. And there's, 70 styrofoam coffee mugs there. And he's like, what's going on here? And it was pretty obvious as soon as he mentioned me, well, I guess I'll use one of the reusable coffee mugs that I already own. That's not a hard shift. I can make that change. But somewhere in my core, I think I thought, well, I'm just one person. What can I do? And a couple days after that, I had, was sitting there and I realized, well, wait a minute. I oversee stadium operations for an NFL team. I oversee facilities. I'm on committees for best practices at a league level. there's actually probably a lot that I can do. I'm not nearly as helpless as, for whatever reason, I thought that I was. And that sparked a little bit more of an activism around the topic within the organization. And we made some changes, and then COVID came, and a lot of single-use styrofoam ended up coming back into play for sanitary purposes and stuff like that. But that was really, that was kind of the first impetus that got me thinking about it. And then I read a book shortly thereafter by a thought leader that I really like named Charles Eisenstein. And the book is called The More Beautiful World That Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And it's about the environment to some degree, but really it's about the stories that we tell ourselves. And the story of that, the dominant story that we tell ourselves is this story of separation, where I'm me and you're you, and I'm better than you because I'm me. And even if we can kind of get past that, where we're equals because we're both humans, there's people that are on the other side of the planet that we're better than, or at least the rocks and the mosquitoes and these other things. We're not the atmosphere, we're not the soil. But there's another story that we keep telling ourselves that, and this is actually backed up by a lot of science and by how nature works, it's that we're all interconnected. In this room right now, we're sharing atoms and molecules, and we're fundamentally changed physically from this interaction that we're having, and that can be scaled at any scale you want to look at it. And so it's this story that Charles Eisenstein called the story of interbeing, of realizing that it's all interconnected. And when you start seeing things that way, environmental regeneration and a lot of solutions become really obvious and are actually not that challenging once you can get out of the stories that we're telling ourselves. And so that when I first started to adopt that philosophy, I got more and more passionate about it and started listening to all these podcasts. And eventually I realized, that on the way to work in the morning on Monday through Friday, instead of putting on sports radio, I was listening to various environmental podcasts. And I'm wondering, well, why am I getting so tired of being at work and getting burned out? Oh, my passion has shifted. And for better or worse with me, I'm going to follow my passion. And so I started this plan in place to do something that in this case, I'm passionate about, but I think also can make a really big difference in our local communities that, I think makes a really good business sense to do at this stage for almost everybody. So good chance to make a business out of it too.
Right. The market is ready for it. It's in the conversation. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things when I'm in the classroom teaching students and talking with students about how to recognize opportunities. I talk about that. What are the conversations that we're having as a society? It's about, there's a timing element. Mm-hmm. And I think you recognize that. But there's also the element of passion and is this the right thing for me to do? Is this attractive for me? And can you make money doing this? So that's a really good opportunity recognition story that you've just told. And it's really fascinating how that one comment from the gentleman that came into your office started this whole trajectory for you. Mm-hmm. And I find that when I'm talking with people about how they recognize their opportunity, that's kind of how it happens. And so you went out and collected all this information and self-educated. Another, strong entrepreneurial trait. Many entrepreneurs have a lot of formal education, which you do as well, but self-education around something they're really interested in. Mm-hmm. So it's a classic opportunity recognition. Now, one of the big challenges once we get the big idea is putting it into action. So at the time you were fully employed, right? So you had a paycheck coming in, right? And you're working like many of us do, and all of a sudden you've got this idea and it's turning into something that's consuming a lot of your time and your mental space, and you decide you want to do something about it. What was that transition like, and how did you go about that? Did you just after one of those drives to work say I'm done, or did this take a while?
It was, in some ways it was fairly sudden. I had this realization that my passion had shifted. And it was I really loved my time with the Buccaneers and had a great time with it. But, I was the operational manager that had to put together some of the COVID plans. And I spent 10 weeks as the only Buccaneers employee at the stadium during the real scary times of COVID. And it's like, it was a hard year. And then we ended up, getting Tom Brady and winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I got to go to the Super Bowl with my best friend for 25 years and see my home team, my team I work for, win the Super Bowl in our home stadium and, get the Super Bowl ring. And it felt like, I felt really great about that and it felt perfect, but it felt like there was nothing more for me to do. What am I going to stay in this role and, do another season, do more of this stuff? Tom Brady woke up the day after getting his 7th ring and went back to work the next day. He had more Super Bowl rings than any other team on the planet had, and he's motivated to keep going. And I didn't have that same passion anymore for football. So I knew that had shifted, and then it's okay. Well, how do I turn this into a plan? How do I do this in a way that can still pay the mortgage and care for my family and keep myself in that type of situation? So there was some planning that went into it. But, for me, I really basically dove into it. I ended up giving like 3 or 4 months notice to the Buccaneers that I was going to be leaving to do that transition. And I was fortunate to have the savings to give myself a pretty long runway of, I don't need to make money right away to make this work. And so I, finished my time with the Buccaneers, and I knew, okay, if I want to be an environmental consultant, I should get some credentials. So I studied for my lead AP exam and passed that like the first month after I was done there, and then started to figure out how am I going to take shape with this. And one of the things that like kind of came up, at one point, my company initially was called Quaid Management, and I'll go get my lead credentials. I have a lot of construction background experience, so I can go manage some lead projects and do some stuff that's a little bit more in line that way. And to some degree, I do that type of stuff still. But I had a conversation, with the airport, and I went and met with their sustainability director and was talking through what I wanted to do and what I was passionate about. And like it always does, it ends up talking about regenerative practices. And she says, well, we would never do regenerative agriculture. We're an airport. And that comment like sat with me. I'm like, well, but you have 3,300 acres of land, and you have this initiative to cut your carbon in half in the next, that time, 9 years. And there's some ways that there's get some solar, do some things. There's definitely some ways to reduce that footprint, but also you have 3,300 acres of land that you can do something with, and realize that, for me, and I'm not the person who coined it, although I think I came up with it without it being influenced, was this, you might not do regenerative agriculture, but you could do regenerative land management and looking at the way you're using land to create life and to get carbon out of the atmosphere. And so once I came up with the idea of that, shortly afterwards, it's, well, we can start making these regenerative shifts in our life. And then the idea of the company grew. And then it was so much more than just Quaid Management, which is, certainly one, seems like Quaid managing stuff, to now this is something that is, can be really more of a conversation about something that I'm passionate about and something that can grow and be much bigger than me.
Yeah, I just love it. I sit on the board of a public company here in that's headquartered here in Clearwater, and we have these conversations about ESG all the time. And if this can be part of the equation, I think it's really pretty amazing. How did the airport respond to you, and were they your first big break, or where did your first big, because a lot of times the first big customer can make a really big difference.
Sure. So the airport's not a customer. We had that conversation. They were, Melissa over there was wonderful in giving me some good ideas, and I've had some conversations with them, and I do expect to do some work with them at some point. My first big break, I was fortunate to have relationships at the stadium. And the big project that we did there actually started with a conversation with their senior vice president of operations. And I just launched my company, just come up with the branding for Regenerative Shift, and was having my first conversation with their SVP of operations after I left the Bucs, and was telling him what I was trying to do. And he said, well, Caleb, I have a purchase order on my desk to buy an aluminum fence. Is there something we could do that's better than that? And what they were dealing with a curb jumping problem in one of their parking lots, where actually it was mostly post game, guys who have a little bit of liquid courage in their F-350s were running over the little knee fence that they had there and leaving the parking lot because they didn't want to wait 10 minutes to and go the way on the road they don't want to go or whatever. And so they were going to put in an 8-foot aluminum fence, and that had a cost to it. and has an environmental impact to it. Aluminum is extractive and has a carbon impact as well. And that conversation sparked a conversation about a living fence and what we could do that is solving the same business problem of how do you stop curb jumping. But we were able to do that. In February, we planted a 1,100-foot living fence of bamboo and native plants that bamboo is the fastest growing plant in the world. And this type is a little bit less aggressive than some of them, but sequesters more carbon on the planet per acre than any plant in the world. And we were able to put this up. It's a nice, big, intimidating fence that is not getting driven through. And is getting carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil. And then through the plant we used was shiny wild coffee, which is a nice native plant that has flowers that pollinate and berries that feed birds, and birds build nests in it. And so we're able to solve the same business problem in a way that creates life and gets carbon where it's more useful. And it costs less money than an aluminum fence. So that project, obviously a very prominent client, Raymond James Stadium and the Tampa Sports Authority, really, made me know I'm still pretty much known as the bamboo fence guy in circles that have heard of me. But Fox 13 came out and covered that. Actually got a lot of news coverage on it, and that was certainly helpful for launching my business and getting the discussion with other clients, because I think it does show like there's, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the stadium is a leader. They're, a business leader. And when they start to realize that these things make business sense, that opens the door for those conversations to happen the next level down, which they have been.
So, a lot of landfills, for example, are reclaimed. Could this work? Could this be helpful to like even something that you could plant on top of a landfill? Because a lot of times those are just, empty pieces of land after they're reclaimed and covered.
Yeah, so certainly, landfills, I think there's a lot of things that you could do with them, but anywhere that you have land and you have soil, using strategic plants that will improve that soil, and depending on what your business goal is, but at a minimum, an old landfill that's covered could support a bunch of monarch butterflies that are going through there by having the right type of pollinating plants. And some of them I think do. I know there are projects that are working on strategic plantings and that. But yes, you absolutely, anywhere you've got soil, you can build that soil.
So you
can
put the soil on top, and as long as you have a certain depth of soil, you could put plants and.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they do after they cover a landfill, but really in most cases, you don't even need to put soil on top. There are plants that build soil. So there's, this is getting a little bit into agriculture, but if you eat a tomato, that tomato is really high in nitrogen, and so is almost all the food you eat. Plants and animals are very high in nitrogen. And the atmosphere is majority nitrogen. But most plants, a tomato plant included, can pull nitrogen out of the soil and doesn't have a process of getting the nitrogen out of the air. But there are many plants that are nitrogen fixing, that have the ability through their photosynthesis to breathe in that nitrogen and then deposit that into the soil through their roots. And so they are good. And a lot of those are actually called weeds, turns out. And what happens when you leave nature alone, or you can be strategic as humans and get involved in a way that that helps to speed up the process, those weeds will come and create soil and create the conditions that will allow for more complex life to be there. And then you'll watch these cycles over time. I was just up in Virginia, and they were talking about after a burn, how these little shrubs grow, and then the pines grow, and the pines live for 5 or 10 years, and they fall over, and then they build the soil and they create these whole fungal networks, and then the oaks grow that live 800 years after that, right? And so nature has these ways of doing that, and certainly we know enough about it that we can be involved in that process to guide it in the directions that are most useful for whatever our purposes that we have at the time are.
Yeah, I think I told you that I grew up with a mom who was an amateur horticulturalist, and she always loved, she always taught me that you really want to work with what you've got, the environment that you're in. And I actually grew up in the Virginia and West Virginia area. So we're down here in Florida, and we've got a lot of sandy, we kind of got a sandy, salty climate, especially I'm on the water. Are there things that those of us who live maybe in here at sea level, or maybe you mentioned deserts earlier, can this be done in a lot of different contexts?
Yeah, it can be done in, if they can do it in the Ethiopian desert, I think it can work in a lot of contexts. And they did that there's an amazing documentary if someone's interested called Regreening the Desert. It's on YouTube, about 40 minutes long. They did it without any added water, and they managed to grow forests in the desert in Rwanda and Ethiopia using these types of practice. A lot of it is managing your water flow and managing where it goes on your property. But in terms of just the real low-hanging fruit and easy things, in any ecosystem that you're going to have, except maybe like full desert, you're going to have native plants that are in it. And so just as an example, talking sandy soil, well, there's a sunflower, a little sunflower, it's about the size of a quarter, called the dune sunflower. It's also called the beach sunflower, that's native to this area, that literally grows in sand dunes. You could take that and put that in the sandiest soil that you can find, and it doesn't need to be watered. It doesn't need to be fertilized. You actually can kill it if you fertilize it, because it's used to just living in sand and figuring out how to survive in that type of thing. And so there are, thousands of native plants, some of which are really good for native landscapings and really beautiful and can be incorporated in a lot of these designs from one, if you have your front yard and you change nothing about it except you plant one Florida firebush in the middle of it, in 6 months, you'll see bees buzzing around it and all this stuff. I mean, in my yard has a lot of wildlife in it already, but I just recently planted another one, bought another one of those firebush plants. And I had it in my garage because the hurricane was coming. So I was going to plant it after the hurricane. And I went out one day with the garage open, and there were literally bees in my garage doing it, like getting the pollen from this plant before it's even in the ground. So that can be really beneficial to your ecosystems and to that. I wouldn't recommend putting it in your garage if you don't want bees in there, but, can go in the soil. That plant needs nothing once it's in the soil. It can go in, maybe get it established, but if you're planting it in somewhat of a rainy season, you never even need to water it once, and that will live and will grow and will support life for years. So
another cost-saving element, it would seem to me, if you've got a large piece of land, your corporate client's got a large piece of land, this is low-maintenance gardening as well, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's one of the things, looking at things from a business perspective, typically, what I've found is most companies, if they have a sustainability plan at all, it's very siloed. Typically, some do it better than others, but you have your director of sustainability, and they're managing their $50,000 sustainability budget, and that's great. We need some of that stuff. There's going to be things that cost money, that are beautiful to do that have some cost with it. But if you look at your landscaping budget and your operations budget, there's a lot of things you're spending money on that you could probably, just by looking at it with a different lens, spend less money on. Adapted and native plants don't need to be watered. They don't need to be fertilized. They need less maintenance. Some of them, it depends on what plant you're getting in. Some of them need to be maintained. Some of them don't need to be maintained. I know you and I, when we met before, we talked about perennial peanut, which I think we're sitting on a college campus right now, I think should be all over this college campus. It is a ground cover that is nitrogen fixing, so it heals the soil. It is grows to about 3 inches tall and then doesn't grow anymore. It is native, so it doesn't need to be watered, doesn't need to be fertilized. And it's a host plant for certain types of butterflies, and it's a pollinating plant that bees and butterflies and stuff love. And you could plant that, maybe not where you have the quad where everybody's going to lay, because I understand there's nice needs for beautiful grass where you're laying down, but in medians and on campus and in the areas where you don't want people walking, here's something that you don't even, weeds will grow up through it. So maybe mow it once a month or once every 2 months to get the other plants that are growing in there some, but you don't need to water it every week. And you certainly don't need to have irrigation running through it like you would a St. Augustine or Zoysia grass. And that can be right out of your landscaping budget and save you money, and that then you can use for other business needs or to kick up a little more into the sustainability budget for next year.
Yeah. And it's such a great PR message, right? Mm-hmm. You're a corporation or a college or some other kind of organization, and you can really promote what you're doing, for the environment and for future generations. So Regenerative Shift, I think it offers 5 services. Does that include this kind of consulting, helping people design and look at their budgets, design spaces. So what are the services you provide?
Yeah, so it really boils down into kind of a holistic look at how your business is running and whatever business challenges the business decisions you're making at that time, and how do we put life at the center of that decision. So with the stadium, we didn't solve all their environmental challenges or all their business challenges with the fence, but we looked at one and we did one that was less expensive, met the business need in a way that created life. So I do have on there different buzzwords for different things we do. I am LEED certified, and if you're building a building and you want to go through building an environmentally friendly building, I could work on that type of project and manage that type of business situation. There's three buckets in the sustainability world that I mentioned. One is your traditional sustainability, which actually there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that businesses just aren't doing that have direct return on investment. I'm working with a large company right now. We just did a presentation on solar that has a sub 4-year return on investment and will save them millions of dollars over the 25-year life of the system. And, yes, that's environmentally more friendly to have a solar system than to, pay a couple $100,000 a year of electricity. But it's also just an obvious business decision. Where are you going and getting 25, 30% ROI on any business decision that you're making? So there's a lot of low hanging fruit that just, for whatever reason, prices have come down, so people don't understand it. But looking at, starting with the low hanging fruit of renewable energy and water efficiency and energy efficiency stuff that will have direct operational savings and really strong ROIs, that's kind of mostly where traditional sustainability is in that space these days, and certainly can help with some of that. And then at a high level, at a global level, we have this climate crisis that we're dealing with, and there are strategies to mitigate that and strategies to adapt to the changes that may be coming. So from a mitigation standpoint, that's how do you figure out ways to get carbon out of the atmosphere or to stop lessen the extinctions and things like that are taking place. My personal favorite strategy is regeneration, which has a lot of solutions for that type of stuff. But then on the adaptation side of things, there's also holistically looking at it, there might be some needs for cities or companies to adapt to things. One of my clients is a large Tampa-based construction company, and we had a conversation on, let's look at what the construction landscape is going to be over the next 10 years. What regulations are going to be coming in for environmental space? What might, codes might change. And they're very interested in a holistic, let's look at how we're building. Let's look at this from, certainly there's some altruism and some, environmental love that comes with it. But it's also, if we want to be in business in 10 years, we probably need to start getting on the forefront of different materials that we can build with, different ways that we're going to brand ourselves and do this stuff. And so what I try to do, there's a lot of silos in the environmental space, and I'm not necessarily perfect at it, but try to look at things holistically around your business and what are the strategies that we can do now in the medium term and in the long term to build this strategy to help your business grow in a way that's going to position you for what's coming down the line.
Yeah. So you work with all of those things. It's not just about the landscaping, although that's one of your favorite areas to work with.
Correct. Yeah. So I would, there are, I don't want to say plenty, there's a few sustainability consultants and different people that are focusing on, commissioning and renewable energy and some of those type of traditional sustainability projects. And I can do those, but there's some competition in that space. As of now, I'm the only company that's really focusing on environmental regeneration. So that's, it's my company name. That's sort of my niche and what I think is actually the beautiful stuff to work on. And actually where most of my business actually is, I'm getting hired more for that type of stuff, which is more of a unique service as well.
I think that part of your challenge is that you're early in this space. And so that requires market education. Mm-hmm. What have you learned about that? For any entrepreneurs who are listening to this and they may be doing the same thing. I know I have some students that are in the blockchain space and, they're doing some things that are, that the average, person or business out there may not be thinking about. So what have you learned about how to build a company that also has to educate the market?
Well, you're right. I mean, I would say almost all my conversations, including, at a university level, I got brought in to the University of South Florida to give an introduction to regeneration as a talk at their speaker series. It is relatively unknown, even in sustainability circles, some of these practices for whatever reason. So most of what I do is education and talking things like this podcast to get the word out some. And that is a really cool opportunity because it does leave me in a space where I'm getting some runway to get more knowledgeable and be able to build a business and have some of these projects that are experienced before everybody else catches on to the fact that, yes, there's a business to be made out of, preventing global warming and stuff. That's good business. But it is also, every conversation is starting with somebody and having that conversation pretty much for the first time they've heard of it. And so I've gotten a lot of my business has come from people who have heard their first podcast on regeneration. One of my clients is based on the other side of the United States and found me through a LinkedIn search of the word regenerative, which it's kind of crazy to be in that space where there's not too much branding around it. But that's a really cool opportunity. The other thing that I'd be certainly with the amount of knowledge that I had on it when I started this business, and the need that I need to bring in for, one of my projects right now is this 87-acre plot of land that is trying to change the way they're managing their cattle and their livestock. I don't have enough knowledge to do that project without some beautiful consultants that I work with. And so, it'd be hard to carve out, hey, I'm Regenerative Shift, and that's the only type of thing I'm working on at the stage of market development and also, frankly, the stage of knowledge that I have on some of these things. But what I have is, there is this market of sustainability consulting, and that's out there. And I have some experience in that. I have some credentials in that. And there are construction projects that are being built that have sustainability focus. And then there's also other construction projects that don't have a sustainability focus that I have a lot of experience in, that fortunately those types of jobs I can get and they can pay the bills while I build something. And so I've been able to bridge the gap as I learn more and as the market starts to catch on to these things with some stuff that is some skill set that I have that if I didn't have that skill set, it might be hard to operate this in this space.
Yeah, so you're bootstrapping it really with some of the work that the market is familiar with, and hopefully once they start working with you, then you can start talking about regeneration and build that brand. And I just think it's really exciting what you're doing. And I know that it's not easy. You started this company last year. Mm-hmm. And so you're early in this. What's been some of the bigger challenges that you've had to deal with as a startup, and especially in a space like this?
Yeah, for the most part, I've really enjoyed the process, and I am at a stage of life where I like the waves and I like a little bit of the uncertainty for the most part. I say that, but my biggest challenge that I've had is my parents from a very young age, when I got $50 for Christmas, taught me to somehow, I was thinking I was making the decision to spend 5 of it and put 45 in the bank. And I thought that was my decision when I was 6 years old. But I've always been a saver. I've always known that, you live within your means or less than your means every month. Like you figure out what you make that month and you have to live on lower than that. I took that, my first job in the NFL was minimum wage with the Miami Dolphins. And, I was living in Section 8 housing, and I was, living very, very meagerly, but, managed to spend less money than I was earning, during that time on that thing. And that just has always been, well, you can't spend more money than you make. You just can't do it. Right. So this, financially in a much better position than I was when I was an intern with the Dolphins, and planned this and had the runway and had this idea of, this is how long I can go. This is how much of my savings I'm willing to commit to this before I say this doesn't work, et cetera. But psychologically, it's been different. And now I'm past that stage of my business. It's been 7 or 8 months that I've made more money each month than I've spent. But in the early going, first half year plus of this business, I wasn't. And so to watch psychologically this spreadsheet that I've maintained for the last 25 years that keeps track of every dollar that I spend and all my net assets, to see that go down every month, even though it was planned, psychologically was challenging for me. And then something that I've been dealing with along the same lines in the entrepreneurial space. So now, the last 7-8 months, I've had this project that's paying the bills and everything's been going really well. And that goes for a few more months. That's different than a salary. That's different than having job security and knowing, hey, you're going to get this paycheck in 2 weeks. So when you plan a vacation, it's paid vacation and you're going to have this paid, you're going to come back. And as long as you do a good job, which I've always been, able to do, you have job security and you're going to be able to get that money. Now there's, this project that's taking up a lot of my time. Well, what am I doing for this next project? And even if I have that all figured out and I've got this runway, well, how long can I really, I don't have 2 years that I can't make money on this business. So I really don't know if I want to spend that money on the vacation right now. It's been a little bit of a different mindset shift of how to manage my money in a way that doesn't fall into a scarcity mindset, which is an area of meditation and growth on like realizing that, no, this business is thriving and I'm, making double my expenses this month. And that's awesome. And still getting caught into, but what if in 4 months I don't? Like that mindset's been a little bit of an adjustment for me as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, there's a fear. There's a fear in there I write about that in my book that I recently published. And there's a whole chapter on fear of failure. And how people with an entrepreneurial mindset handle that. And it's something that we all have to overcome, I think, if we want to do this thing, because it's real. It's very real and it's scary. But I just love what you're doing, Caleb. And I think I think you've got a real opportunity here. It makes a lot of sense and it's really exciting. And I'm just really excited that we're able to share your story here on the In Factor. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more and more about how your company is growing and succeeding. Optimism is kind of the other mindset that we have to have. So a belief that the future is going to be bright. And I just see, as somebody who's worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over the year, I see a lot of promise in this. So, and a lot of promise in you. So congratulations. I could talk all day, I think, about this. It's really fascinating to me, but I know that you've got a lot of work to do out there. So I want to kind of wrap this up with the question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give to our audience, knowing that many of them are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, so if I can, I'll give kind of two things. One, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I think, start as soon as you can. But when your expenses are low, like by the time you have a mortgage and you have kids with daycare and stuff like that, there's, you have to make a certain amount of money in order to cover those things. And, that can add to the fear. If you can live lean and start when your expenses are low and realize that $1 saved is $1 you don't have to earn. And that's an important part of this process for me, for sure. But I just dive into it and start, before you have the mortgage might be a good time to do that. And then kind of my overall thing is, what I define regeneration as, I borrowed this from Paul Hawken, who literally wrote the book called Regeneration, who I spent some time studying with. But regeneration is putting life at the center of decision making. And you can substitute beauty or health or love, but when you're making a decision, so for the listeners that are out there that are thinking about in the short term, medium term, long term, whether it's a major decision on how to start their business or to live their life, or it's a really minor decision, how can you, think about that in a way that factors life into that decision and puts life at the center of that decision-making process. That's been a philosophy that has guided my whole journey with Regenerative Shift and is much more than a business for me. It's how I'm living and how I'm doing things as best I can. And I found a lot of joy and beauty in that type of philosophy and question to ask myself.
That's beautiful. And I think, I think there's a lot that we can all do. And regeneration is something that I know you're working mostly with corporations, but each of us on an individual basis, if we have that kind of philosophy, it brings life rather than destroys life.
Absolutely.
So I love it. So thank you again for joining me. Where can our listeners find out about Regenerative Shift, or find out more about you or connect with you?
Sure. I'm on Regenerative Shift is on LinkedIn and Facebook from social media. That's where I'm most active with updates. I just posted today a beautiful project that we just got in the ground. We planted vegetable gardens at construction sites last week, which
Nice.
is such a fun project. But anyway, that's where you can find most of that information. I have a website that's got a lot of resources and education and certainly ways to contact me through. Really good place to go if you want to find, hey, what is regeneration? There's literally a link on there that says new to regeneration, start here, and it will walk you through that process and then bury you with as deep down the rabbit hole as you want to go on my site, and then all these links out to podcasts and other websites to look at. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well. If someone wants to connect with me personally, Caleb Quaid on LinkedIn, would love to connect and have some conversations.
Thank you, Caleb.
Thank you. Appreciate it so much.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about entrepreneurship, we would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of InFactor.